Welcome to Never Again Is Now, a podcast about anti-Semitism. I am Phyllis Zimbler Miller, the founder of the free nonfiction Holocaust theater project that edgeofthewedge.com. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest with a small Jewish community, and my grandparents came from Latvia and Russia at the turn of the 20th century. My U.S. Army officer husband and I were stationed in Munich, Germany, only 25 years after the end of World War II. This podcast is in partnership with Evelyn Marcus, a Dutch Jew and the daughter of Holocaust survivors, featured in the documentary Never Again Is Now. A psychologist, she immigrated to the US in 2006 from Holland because of the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe. Our guest for this episode is Jacob Millner, who's going to tell you about himself. Jacob?
Thank you, Phyllis. It's good to be here with you. About myself, I grew up also, like you, in the suburbs of Chicago, although I grew up on the North Shore of Chicago in a suburb called Glencoe, which is about 25 miles along the lake north of the city. Strong Jewish community, strong Jewish upbringing. I would say a good percentage of my classes in junior high school and middle school were, had Jews in them. I was far from the only Jewish kid in the school, as you had mentioned. That being said, there were always elements of anti-Semitism that existed. Nothing blatant or overt. Just that you might hear a comment here or there. I will say that it was interesting when I ended up going to high school. I went to New Trier High School, which is a great high school on the North Shore of Chicago. It's a very large high school. Each class had about 1,000 students in the class, and by purely a guess, an estimate, I would say the school was probably 10 to 15% Jewish. So maybe 100 to 150 kids, Jewish kids per class. But a similar type thing. There was a very strong Jewish bent to the classes in the school. The Hebrew was offered as a foreign language in the school. We got off for Jewish holidays, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, for example. That was kind of built into the equation. But you would occasionally hear something here and there. There was a Israel club and a Hebrew club and all those sorts of things. But overall, I would say growing up on the North Shore of Chicago, it was a very, in the 90s, I should say, is a very idyllic time to be growing up as a Jewish kid in this country. It was kind of with the backdrop of everything in the Middle East was, post-Oslo. I guess America this was pre 9/11 as well. So it was a nice time to be growing up. And I will say that in terms of anti-Semitism, we were pretty well shielded from it. I don't know if I can't speak for all the experiences of my contemporary classmates and my fellow students, but I will say that at least from my perspective, we were shielded from it. We were kind of blissfully ignorant and unaware as to what was happening in the world. Sure, we heard stories here and there, and we saw what was going on in Israel, and occasionally you would hear stories, but it always was somewhere else. Growing up on the North Shore of Chicago was very enjoyable, and like I said, you would hear occasionally stories of, or if somebody would make a comment here or there, but it was never. I don't think it was ever meant in a malicious way. At least that was the way I interpreted it as a younger kid on the North Shore.
Well, let's skip ahead to what you do now for a living, but I just want to say something. I grew up in Elgin, which was not a suburb. It could have been as far away as Mars from the north side of Chicago. So it was a totally different experience. I'm just laughing because people call it a suburb. It's not a suburb. But tell us now what you're doing with the American Jewish Committee.
Yes, thank you. And I will second that statement that Elgin is about as far away from the North Shore of Chicago as Mars, as you correctly said. So right now I'm working with the American Jewish Committee. I am in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I'm currently living, heading up our office here, but I'm also working as part of our national staff, where I oversee a number of our Midwest offices, and I work with our policy team on a number of our state level advocacy endeavors, for example. Do you want me to? I'll talk a little bit about how I kind of got to where I am now.
Yeah, that's fine.
So I went to college at the University of Illinois in Champaign, or Urbana-Champaign. And then I came up to Minnesota for graduate school at the University of Minnesota at the Humphrey School of Public Policy at the University of Minnesota, where I got a master's degree. And I ended up graduating in 2008, which, as you may recall, was kind of the height of the Great Recession. It was not a great job market. That being said, though, I did get lucky, and I ended up with a job here in Minneapolis at the local Jewish Community Relations Council of Minnesota and the Dakotas. Yes, it covers the Dakotas, where there are like a total of 500 Jews in 2 states. South Dakota actually does have the fewest amount of Jews of any state in America, and about 200 or 250 in the state, of which I can name about 50 of them. It's a very strong Jewish community. It's just very small. That being said, after a number of years of doing that, I ended up leaving the JCRC and got into lobbying, not Jewish related, more business related, to trade associations and other things. And that really sparked my interest in government affairs and working with government officials and that sort of work, which then kind of bled into another role I had with the Israel Project, which then led into where I am now with AJC, which kind of marries both roles, kind of my passion and interest in Jewish issues, in fighting anti-Semitism, obviously, in working in, safeguarding the U.S.-Israel relationship, but also working on the policy side of things, working with government officials to create policies which safeguard the Jewish community, which would stand up for pluralism and human rights, and then obviously working to strengthen, and maintain the U.S.-Israel relationship as well. So that's kind of what brought me to where I am today, and I've been with AJC now for, good question, what year is it? I feel like we lost a year just now. I've been with AJC now for 2 years, just over 2 years, but one of those years was COVID, so I feel like, but it's been a great experience, and it's really shown me, not just from a management perspective, helping manage some of our Midwest offices, like I said, which I've been doing, but also really working with a large Jewish organization that spans, that really focuses on Jewish global advocacy, and has, one of the mainstays, one of the mainstream large organizations that's been around for 100+ years. But it's really kind of helped me to develop my skills and my interest, again, in working with like local governments, whether it's our Mayors United Against Anti-Semitism campaign, or working with our governors against the BDS campaign, or working in state capitals around the country to help Holocaust education or hate crimes legislation. And then obviously the work that we're doing on the federal level and around the world as well. So all of that it's been a really great experience, and it's really allowed me to hone a lot of the skills that I've been working on over the years, and has really been excellent because it's combined, like I said, some of the passions that I have, which are, Israel, Judaism, and public policy.
Let me ask you about any specific anti-Semitic incidents that you're currently working on that you can share with us, whether you yourself have faced it as you've done this work, which Evelyn and I are very interested in the personal, or whether as a representative of the organization, you've been dealing with specific problems.
Specific, there have been a number of anti-Semitic incidents going on. I mean, anti-Semitism in this country in particular has spiked in the past, since May, in the past 2 months. And we're all aware of, I think what those incidents have been. But I will say one of the things that I'm proud of is in Arizona, they just passed a Holocaust education bill. It was just signed into law today, actually, by the governor. And that was a bill that we worked very hard on making sure it passed into law. And surprisingly, not that many states actually have mandated Holocaust education. I think it's 15 or 16 now. Arizona just passed the law today. And that was a bill that I was very proud to work on, not because it's important, I think, as the Holocaust moves farther away from memory and its survivors, we start losing the last of our survivor communities. But we saw a spike in anti-Semitism in Arizona, in Tucson in particular. There were a number of anti-Semitic incidents. One in a Chabad house last month, and there was another at a synagogue in Tucson as well. I think there were 2 incidents in May or June. And so I think it underscores the importance of Holocaust education and learning about hate crimes, particularly as they affect the Jewish community, because as we were saying earlier, hate crimes as they're targeted toward Jews are oftentimes, they seem to not be taken as seriously, or the community doesn't rally around the Jewish community as much. And as the FBI statistics will show you, the latest round of FBI data, which is from 2019, because it always lags a year, 60% of all religious bias crimes in the United States are directed at Jews, and Jews make up 2% of the population. So clearly there's something going on, and figuring out a way to kind of thread that needle and make sure people are learning about not just the Holocaust, but anti-Semitism in general, I think is an important thing. Another thing that we worked very closely on is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'll just say in May at some point, it was May or June, the Cambridge City Council was working on an anti-Israel BDS resolution, and AJC, but also with a number of other organizations in Boston, worked to actually defeat it and to stop it, which is an accomplishment in a city like Cambridge, which is a very, very, very progressive community.
Let's just remind people, Harvard is there and MIT is next door.
Yeah, it is absolutely. But the Cambridge City Council and Cambridge as a whole has been a fight for a long time. And to be working in Cambridge and to be seeing the dynamic there and having the Jewish community rally and working with their counterparts on the city council and within the community, it's an important sign that a lot can be done if we kind of all come together and push back in an effective way.
So tell me about, since we're talking about Holocaust education, when did you first become aware about the Holocaust? Did your parents tell you? Did you learn in school? Do you even remember?
So it's an interesting question you asked me. So on both sides of my family, both my mother and my father's side, both sides had been in this country for since for the early 20th century, late 19th century. So both of my grandparents, both on my mother's father and my father's father, both fought in World War II for the United States. So I didn't have any Holocaust survivors in my family. And there's stories of relatives that are distant relatives, like grandparents, just, second, third cousins from Poland, but nobody who was directly in my orbit of people, which I always thought was a little bit strange, because when I was a younger child, before we moved to the North Shore, I actually lived in the city of Chicago. My parents had a condo in Lakeview, and we went to Antisemitic day school.
Oh, okay.
In Chicago until third grade. And so I remember learning about the Holocaust, and I remember some of my good friends, their grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and they would come in and talk about their experiences. So I don't remember exactly when I learned about it, but I distinctly remember it was before third grade, because people's friends' grandparents would come in and they would talk about their experiences in the camps and under Nazi rule. So I don't have a really great answer. I was young, certainly, but I always did recognize the fact that I didn't have that sort of firsthand experience. None of my grandparents were survivors, none of that. So, but I was young. I don't know if it was first, second grade, kindergarten. I don't know exactly. It was
right. But then you switched to public school, right? When you moved to Glencoe.
Yes,
And
correct.
do you remember just learning about the Holocaust in school?
You asked a good question. So I'm a big history guy. My major in college was history. I love history. I remember learning history. I don't remember necessarily at what points we learned about the Holocaust. I think we learned about it in 7th or 8th grade for sure. But I don't remember exactly what the Holocaust curriculum was. And I remember learning about it in high school, I think junior year, as part of American history, as it touched on World War II. But it would have been 7th and 8th grade, I think we would have had a curriculum on the Holocaust. But I don't remember, it doesn't come to top of mind, to be honest with you. But I know it was in the curriculum. Like we did talk about it. It was a thing.
That's what I wanted to know.
Yeah.
So
it did pop up. I just don't remember the exact.
Okay, it's not a quiz here. What I wanted to ask you now is, what do you tell people if they come to you just, unofficially and say, this happened to me, an anti-Semitic comment or I witnessed the act? Do you have advice that you give them about what they can say, or without exposing themselves to physical danger?
It depends on, it really does depend on the situation. There's obviously, if it warrants calling the police, by all means, you should call the police. And I will say that statistics show from AJC surveys that we've done, and I've seen from other organizations as well, that the number of reported hate crimes is actually, it lags well below the actual number of hate crimes. Most people don't report situations when they come up. So it's unclear what the actual number is, but it's probably a lot higher than what we actually see. But I mean, obviously, if it warrants calling the police, you should call the police. But
why don't you define warrants calling the police? Let's be specific for people.
So if you're in physical danger, or if there's vandalism, or if there is an imminent threat, you should absolutely call the police. But I'm saying if there's an incident that somebody were to say something to you, for example, we have found, interestingly, and I can send you the links after this, if you look at the AJC survey of anti-Semitism in America, we've been doing now since the Pittsburgh shooting, so what is 3 years or so? If you look at the statistics that we've come up with, half of Americans don't even know what the term anti-Semitism means. So we're already starting with an uneven playing field here, is that most people don't even know what the term means. So we have to begin with, like, I think, even a base level of education and help people better understand, what is Jew hatred? What is anti-Semitism? But certainly, getting back to your original question, we can talk more about, anti-Semitism as a whole. Obviously you should alert the proper authorities, I think. And I think that a lot of the issues, I think a lot of the times it's done without malice. I think you just have people who have grown up who don't know any better, and they don't even know that the terms are offensive, to be honest with you. That's, of course, giving people the benefit of the doubt, and that's not always the case. But I'm saying, in the instances sometimes where you hear something like a snide comment or a snarky comment, I think that a lot of times people just don't know that those are anti-Semitic comments. And we see that sometimes even pop up in celebrity culture as well, by the way.
And how do we educate? That's one of the things that we hope to do in this podcast, that we know that people really don't understand, a lot of people, what anti-Semitism is. And how do we make people aware that what they say is inappropriate, and they wouldn't say it to another group, but that they think it's okay to say about Jews?
That's a good question. I think a lot of the things that we're doing, what AJC is doing, what other organizations are doing as well, is to help better educate people, as working through different organizations. We've done trainings, for example, with the National Associations of Attorneys General and the National Associations of, we're working on the National Mayors Association and other groups like that to help them better understand, what the Jewish community thinks in this country. I think it's 90% of American Jews say anti-Semitism has risen in the past 5 years. So the feeling is real out there. I mean, the statistics show it too, but also the actual feeling of the community is there as well. But helping people better understand it's through trainings and through ways to help people understand, because we're already starting, like I said, with a baseline where most people don't even know what anti-Semitism is. So we have to help train them and have them understand that anti-Semitism is really a lot. It's not just a dislike of Jews or hatred of Jews, but it's far more pervasive and much more insidious, I think, than many people realize. Give
us the definition. Share with us some of the ideas that you explain to people, because I think it's important.
Anti-Semitism, it's a whole. Yeah, I've heard it described as a conspiracy theory, that it's basically the idea that Jews, through whatever way you want to project it, this is the wonderful thing about anti-Semitism is that, I'm saying that jokingly, but the wonderful thing about it is, if you're an anti-Semite, it can be whatever you want it to be. If Jews are capitalists and money, and rich, or if Jews are miserly and they're in cahoots with communists, or if Jews are too insular and keep to themselves, or if Jews are trying to pollute the non-Jewish population, as people say, it can be whatever you want it to be. They can be rich, they can be poor, they can be communists, they can be capitalists. It can really represent any worldview, and that's, I think, what makes anti-Semitism so dangerous and so pervasive, even in areas where Jews don't even exist. You see anti-Semitism rampant in the Philippines and in other places where there aren't even any Jews. And I think that speaks to the strength of anti-Semitism over the years.
Wait. So explain. That's very interesting. So where do they get these concepts? For example, in the Philippines, are they taught in school?
Anti-Semitism comes from. I mean, we have through AJC and other organizations. We say anti-Semitism really has three main sources. It comes from the far right, it comes from the far left, and we see it in some people in the name of Islam as well. And I think that those are the three that kind of come together. and create this kind of unholy alliance where you have far right, on the far right in this country and in Europe, see anti-Semitism, and the far left sees it as well, which can sometimes blend with anti-Zionism. And then you see it also oftentimes in the Muslim world, not from all Muslims, but you see strands of it that pop up out of extremism in the Muslim world as well. And
And
so, no, go ahead.
and at a grassroots level, let's just talk about if you're at a party and someone says something to you like, we're not even talking Israel, strictly speaking in this podcast about anti-Semitism against Jews. You know, I work with this Jew at the office and he's always talking about money, and it's just like all Jews that care about money. Instead of freezing or screaming back, what might someone say to that comment? I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but
I mean,
let's discuss it.
I'm always of the opinion, me personally speaking now as
Yes.
Jacob,
Yes.
I'm of the opinion that it's always better to be kind of non-confrontational and to kind of lower the temperature offhand. So if you're at a dinner party and somebody makes a comment like that, I would probably talk to the person offline and see what their issue is, or see if there's a way to have a conversation with them and tell them, as a Jew, that's an offensive comment. It's also a stereotype. It's also anti-Semitic. But I would start by, as I said earlier, giving them the benefit of the doubt. Now, if this person has a history of making comments and has done other things, that might be a different situation. But that would be my approach personally. If this was kind of a one-off situation, and then hopefully it doesn't happen again and he apologizes and we move on with our lives. But I understand that, but I think that part of the problem is with anti-Semitism, this is something we need to work at a deeper level, is that I feel like, and we've been talking about this a little bit earlier, is that those sorts of comments, it would not be acceptable for someone to, at a dinner party, say about the African-American community or the LGBT community, oh, that's like X, that's how all these people are like, it would be clearly, it wouldn't even be in the realm of reasonable conversation. And I feel like they would get called out by it. And I feel like the issue with anti-Semitism is, to some degree, like a lot of bias, there's an issue of normalization around it, but also people I don't think they know how to necessarily respond to it. So we need to make sure people respond to it, whether publicly or privately in that instance. But again, getting back to what we were talking about earlier, there needs to be education on this so that people understand. And we have a great resource. I'll send you the link. It's called Translate Hate. It's on the HAC website, but it goes through and it talks about why a term like globalism is anti-Semitic, or why terms, why these kind of terms are actually anti-Semitic, and it gives kind of a history of them and talks, helps educate people about why they shouldn't be using them. So anything that we can be doing to help educate people, I think, is generally a good thing.
You just said something very important. We have to educate Jews and non-Jews. So in the case of people saying things about Jews, we have to educate why it's offensive, but also we Jews need to be educated about how to handle this, because if we say nothing, I mean, I'm not saying it should be publicly, but if we don't also help educate the person privately, then we're allowing that stereotype to continue. And in many ways, I think we have, I hate to use the word moral obligation, but we do. Just like to me, I feel we have a moral obligation to prevent someone from making a fool of himself or herself. So if a person, let's give that person the benefit of a doubt, doesn't realize it's offensive, it's almost really required of us to, in some way, without embarrassing that person, teach that person that this is an offensive thing and he or she really shouldn't repeat it again.
No, I completely agree. And I think I would hope that would be the case in any instance like this. But I think certainly when it comes to anti-Semitism, the fact that knowledge of anti-Semitism and what is anti-Semitism is so low. The reality of the situation also is that, you live in Los Angeles, I live in Minneapolis, I'm from Chicago. We live in orbits, I think, with sizable Jewish communities. In most of America, there's not that many Jews. I mean, when there's 6-7 million Jews in the United States, maybe 7.5 million. It depends who you're counting. The point is that a lot of these, there's not many Jews, and a lot of people never encounter Jews, and they don't even, they don't have that experience. And what they see is either through television or Hollywood or the caricatures that they see through the, news that they're consuming. And I think that that's important to understand as well, is that, and that's why I kind of take I take a measured approach when dealing with this, is because you see, I just think that people's worldviews are not as broad as we think that they are sometimes. And I think that we have to kind of give people the benefit of the doubt. Now, if they're repeat offenders and, or they know better, that's a different story. But I'm just saying there are many, I think we see things and we hear things sometimes and people just really don't know. And it's incumbent upon us as Jews and people who work in this space to help educate people, whether it's through the schools, whether it's through professional and trade associations. And so large organizations like AJC and federations and other Jewish organizations that are in this space really do have to have our work, cut out for us, and that we need to help help people understand what we're seeing and how we're feeling and what they're doing and how that affects us. I will say one last thing though about anti-Semitism is that it is surprisingly, and again, if you look at the AJC survey, it does bear this out, is that anti-Semitism isn't, I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, and I apologize for that. But there's a segment of people in this country when we surveyed them that had said that if a Jew or a Jewish organization says something is anti-Semitic, it makes them less likely to think it's anti-Semitic. And I think that it's intriguing because I can't imagine any other group, whether it's Black or Asian or LGBT or pick any other group you want, that if they were to say, if someone says that's racist or that's anti whatever, I don't feel like other groups would say, oh, well, if they're saying it, then we're disagreeing with him. Most of the time, we let the groups define what is racist or what is perceived racism on their end. But when it comes to anti-Semitism and anti-Jewishness, there tends to be a little bit more of a pushback, and that's very troubling as well.
Let me just clarify. You mean pushback by Jews themselves? Is that what
again?
Pushback?
No, I mean that if there's an incident that Jews say, if we say that's anti-Semitic, the fact that a Jew or a Jewish organization says it's anti-Semitic in some cases will lead to the opposite reaction from outsiders.
I see.
Which is, I think is that part of the problem with anti-Semitism is that the question is who defines it. We don't argue with other forms of racism. I feel like that's racist, and with anti-Semitism, non-Jews will oftentimes say like, "Oh, that's not anti-Semitic."
Yes. Okay. I think you've said something very important, because so many different forms, and just talking about words right now, we're not even talking about actions. Mm-hmm. That people tend to have, is it called a pass? Exactly. They say, well, that's not anti-Semitic. Mm-hmm. Whereas the offensive language of other people is much clearer. And that's what I'm saying is, as we wrap up this interview, which I'm so grateful for your participating in, that we as Jews have to be sensitive mm-hmm. to what is an anti-Semitic statement, so that we can help educate people without yelling at people and without making them feel badly, because then they'll more likely say it again, but just trying to get people to understand and be sensitive to language for about Jews and about other groups too, because again, there's a learning curve. If you think you can say that about Jews, well, then you might think you can say something about another group, even though it's
they always say that anti-Semitism is the canary in the coal mine, right? Is that, if there's something wrong with society, you see anti-Semitism rise, and what starts with the Jews doesn't end with the Jews. So it's important, I think, to be sensitive to these issues. And I will send you, when we're done, links to some of the materials that I have.
Yes, and as we know, because I do Holocaust education, it was not mm-hmm. just the Jews. We always talk about 6 million Jews, but we don't talk about the Romani and the Jehovah's Witnesses mm-hmm. and the homosexuals and the dissidents and the clergy that were murdered by the Nazis because they didn't agree with the Nazis. So we do have to remember how hate spreads. So I want to thank Jacob for appearing on this podcast. I want to thank listeners for listening. Do check out Evelyn Marcus's documentary. You can see it at her website at Join Never Again Is Now, and my free Holocaust Theater project at thinedgeofthewedge.com. And whenever you can, without risking physical harm, speak up against anti-Semitism and all hate.
Thank you.